but after a decade of complaining about his activities, including corruption which he believed was damaging to their homeland, he was kidnapped, illegally imprisoned, and then tortured in Qatar. HBJ's lawyers argue that he is immune from legal action because he has diplomatic immunity.
The former Prime Minister of Qatar won't face trial for the alleged torture of a British citizen. The London High Court awarded Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim Al-Thani state and diplomatic immunity from prosecution. The verdict follows a case brought by British-Qatari dual national Fawaz Al-Attiya.
Fawaz Al-Attiya's lawyers argue this is a fiction, saying he has never carried out any diplomatic duties and was only appointed as a junior diplomat when he discovered that he was about to be sued.
Well, for more on this, I'm now joined live in the studio by the man who brought that case, Fawaz Al-Attiya.
First of all, naturally, myself and my family and the lawyers are all disappointed. Naturally, the court ruled on a matter simultaneously with another court, which is just Lord Justice Hayden had ruled on the Jafari Estrada case, that basically that he could strip the diplomatic immunity from Wali Jafari. In this case, surprisingly, the court rules the exact opposite, that they are not stripping the Hamad bin Jassim of his diplomatic immunity, which is highly interesting considering the fact that in this case there's a question of torture, there's a question of taking of assets, and more so the fact that he does not actually perform the function of a diplomat.
The issue of offenders hiding behind diplomatic immunity is one troubling leading human rights lawyers.
Oh yes, it's not only being misused, it's being abused. He was also tortured whilst in Qatar, and it does seem to me that very often people who would otherwise have to account for their actions don't do so because they have this claim to diplomatic immunity. And it seems that the British government are prepared to go through a process, and once the process is gone through, they won't actually look behind whether someone is in reality a diplomat or not.
On behalf of myself, not on behalf of my government. Well, I'm talking in my behalf, not in my government. As you know, I am not in the government.
In reality a diplomat or not.
As a private citizen now. As you know, I am not in the government. Private citizen, not in the government.
A diplomat or not.
I'm not in the government.
And the right thing to do would be to come out from the cloak of diplomatic immunity and actually account for his actions. It's a disgrace.
The opponents of a liberal society are not interested in science, and they're not interested in enlightenment, they're not interested in debate. They know all the answers, or they know how to find them.
HBJ's lawyers run up a bill of £1 million for a two-day hearing, with one QC, Lord Panic, submitting an invoice for £407,000, a fee which does not include actually turning up in court. The judge throws the bills out, saying this is a court of law, not a casino.
A referendum which would advise those...
Advise who, precisely?
Well, advise both the government and Parliament.
It's quite dangerous to look at advisory.
Somebody who has this problem, who has this weakness, will perhaps never seek help. He's going to be overconfident. He's actually putting up a big show. And he believes in this show. And that's where the word hypocrisy comes from. Hypokrisis, the Greek word to act out. It's all about a show.
You simply do not debate with ISIL, with Hamas.
Here is HBJ's QC, Lord Panic, speaking in the House of Lords.
My lords, last week a Palestinian man from the West Bank stabbed 10 people in an unprovoked attack on a bus in Tel Aviv. The London Times reported the response from Hamas. It was, they said, a heroic and daring operation. It is vitally important in addressing this problem not to lose sight of the fundamental point that Hamas is a terrorist group.
Meanwhile, the Hamas leader Khaled Mishal lives in Doha. And the man who invited him to live there in the first place? Lord Panic's client, HBJ.
أنتم طلبتم الوساطة القطرية فقلت لهم نعم أنا تكلمت مع معالي وزير الخارجية القطري الشيخ حمد قبل عودتي إلى الأردن والرجل وعد خيرا وهكذا عودنا الإخوة في قطر وفي القيادة القطرية.
But what's interesting is that who's standing behind Hamas, who's funding Hamas, and the answer is Qatar.
They are against negotiations, they're against talking, they're against peace, they are for terror.
But the extreme radical Islamic terror groups, what I call Khomenism without Khomeini.
Well, I will say one thing. I don't agree about all what he said. I told Mr. Perez that. I think he was overreacted.
In dealing with a hypocrite, we're talking about someone who has two faces. On the one hand, he appears to be nice, he appears to be a gentleman, he appears to be righteous, he appears to be devout, pious, charitable, humble, all the beautiful characteristics. But in reality, inside, he's rotten, completely rotten, the exact opposite. And we don't usually see that other face. We usually see the nice face that he puts up as a show.
Supports Hamas in three ways. One is financially. It's given Hamas hundreds of millions of dollars. Two is politically. The ruler of Qatar was the first Arab state to visit Hamas-ruled Gaza in 2012.
That Hamas is a terrorist group. Hamas is a terrorist group.
He was overreacted.
A terrorist group.
Overreacted.
A terrorist group.
أنا تكلمت مع معالي وزير الخارجية القطري الشيخ حمد.
Terrorist group.
Overreacted.
Terrorist group.
Overreacted.
Terrorist group.
Overreacted.
أنا تكلمت مع معالي وزير الخارجية القطري الشيخ حمد.
Not a casino. And the man who invited him to live there in the first place? Lord Panic's client, HBJ.
He was all-powerful, all-influential, and it was very difficult to see how anything took place without him doing that.
It seems like everybody's got a price. I wonder how they sleep at night. When the sale comes first and the truck comes second, just stop for a minute and...
On QC, Lord Panic, submitting an invoice for £407,000, a fee which does not include actually turning up in court. Lord Panic QC is not the only member of the British establishment to protect